independence and sovereignty of the Hawaiian Kingdom. This was in response to a rogue British naval captain, who had briefly seized control of the islands earlier that year. The day is still commemorated by the Hawaiian sovereignty movement as Lakuokoa, or Hawaiian Independence Day. Other European treaties. Into various treaties of friendship, commerce and navigation, with countries including United Kingdom, 1836, 1846. France, 1846, 846. Hamburg, 1848. Bremen, 162. Netherlands, 1862. Italy, 163. German Empire. Oaths with other nations. Extended to nations in Asia and the Pacifics, 1871, 887. These treaties established diplomatic relations. A treaty was signed between who was a significant symbol of its global recognition and participation in international organizations. These treaties collectively illustrate that the Hawaiian Kingdom was a respected and active member of the community of nations. Its robust foreign policy and network of treaties made its eventual illegal overthrow in 1893 all the more egregious from a perspective of international law. Anglo-Franco Proclamation. In 1843, Great Britain and France issued a joint declaration formally guaranteeing Hawaiian independence. The United States later recognized Hawaiian independence in 1849. Diplomatic relations. The Hawaiian Kingdom actively participated in international affairs, establishing over 90 legations and consulates in various cities around the world, including Washington, D.C. It also entered into numerous treaties with countries such as Japan, Italy, and Spain. Constitutional government following unification. The Hawaiian monarchy transitioned from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional one, complete with a legislature and a cabinet. Unlawful overthrow. The Hawaiian Kingdom was not voluntarily dissolved. It was overthrown in a coup d'etat in 1893, led by a small group of American and European businessmen, and supported by U.S. military forces. All-West Apology Resolution. The U.S. government officially acknowledged its illegal role in the overthrow with the Apology Resolution of 1993, recognizing that the native Hawaiian people never directly relinquished to the United States their claims to their inherent sovereignty. A continued existence, international legal scholars and organizations, including an arbitral tribunal of the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 2001, have affirmed that the Hawaiian Kingdom continues to exist as a state under international law. In short, the Hawaiian Kingdom was a fully functioning, sovereign nation-state prior to the illegal overthrow of its government. Many chiefdoms experienced cycles of centralization, expansion, fragmentation, and renewal. The arrival of European explorers in the 16th century, like Hernando de Soto, brought new pressures that accelerated this process. European diseases, to which indigenous populations had no immunity, caused catastrophic population loss, disrupting and ultimately destroying many Mississippian chiefdoms before the full force of colonization arrived. Oral records are not primary, in the same way that written documents are for historical periods. By definition, the prehistoric era is the time before written records, so there are no contemporary oral accounts from that period that could have survived unaltered for millennia. However, oral traditions from later periods still have a significant effect on how researchers study and interpret the prehistoric. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA, requires that museums and federal agencies consult with indigenous communities to return human remains and cultural artifacts. Oral tradition is explicitly recognized as a valid form of evidence to establish cultural affiliation for these items, giving it equal standing with historical documentation and archaeological reports. Identifying sacred sites. Oral histories often identify sacred sites, ceremonial places, and historical landmarks that may not be apparent to outsiders. This allows land managers to protect these areas from development or disturbance. A collaborative interpretation. In national parks and on public lands, indigenous oral histories are used to create more accurate and culturally appropriate interpretive materials for visitors. This includes incorporating indigenous place names and perspectives into park narratives. Instead of dismissing oral accounts, modern academic practice recognizes their value as sources of knowledge and memory, particularly when they are treated with respect and are contextualized within scientific evidence. A corroboration is key. Oral traditions are not used as standalone proof of deep-time events. Their acceptance is contingent on strong corroboration from archaeological, geological, or genetic evidence. Context and interpretation. The narrative context and cultural significance embedded in oral stories are valued. They provide insight into how people made sense of their world, even if the events are framed in mythological terms. The derogatory origins. Rooted in racism, the word nigger derives from the Spanish and Portuguese word negro and the French negre, all ultimately from the Latin word niger, meaning black. Associated with slavery, In the United States, the word was used to categorize, dehumanize, and oppress enslaved black people. It was a tool of white supremacy used to deny the humanity of black people and reinforce the idea that they were inferior, non-human beast animal. Symbol of violence and hate, for centuries, the word has been a tool of violence, intimidation, and control against black people in Americas and Ireland. It evokes the long history of lynchings, segregation, and other forms of racial terror. Its negative connotations are a direct result of this brutal history. The royal history of Negus. A Semitic Negro royalty, Negus is a title for a monarch in the Semitic languages of Ethiopia, such as Amharic, meaning king or ruler. A higher rank was Ngusa Nagast, meaning king of kings or emperor. The Amharic word is pronounced Negus, which is different from the pronunciation of the slur, further demonstrating they are not connected. A symbol of sovereignty. The landmass called Ethiopia has a long, independent history and was never fully colonized by European powers. The title Negus represents this history of Semitic African sovereignty and royalty. Early sightings, some historical sources, and Spanish maps from the 16th century, primarily involving the explorer Juan Gaetano, suggest that the Spanish may have sighted the Hawaiian Islands decades before Captain James Cook's arrival in 1778. Shipwreck oral histories. There are Hawaiian oral traditions, particularly from Kauai, that speak of a shipwreck involving light-skinned foreigners, possibly Spanish, in the mid-16th century. Lack of sustained contact. These encounters were not followed by any Spanish attempt at colonization. The islands were far from the main Spanish trade routes, and Spain kept the existence of the islands a secret to prevent its rival nations from using them as bases to attack its treasure galleons. The arrival of Captain Cook and the Kingdom of Hawaii. Official discovery. The arrival of British Captain James Cook in 1778 marked the beginning of sustained European contact with the islands. Unified Kingdom. Unlike many other indigenous populations in the Americas, the Hawaiians were able to establish a unified kingdom under Kamehameha Thai. This central government helped protect the islands from external military threats and prevented the kind of mass-scale kidnapping and enslavement seen in other Polynesian islands. Abolition of slavery. The Hawaiian Kingdom's strong stance against slavery is evidenced by the 1852 Hawaiian Constitution, which included an article that guaranteed freedom to any slave who arrived on Hawaiian soil. Indentured servitude and blackbirding. Indentured servitude. Although Hawaiians were not enslaved by the Spanish, they did experience forms of exploitative labor. The Hawaiian Kingdom adopted a Master and Servants Act in 1850 that created a system of indentured servitude on plantations, which was often described as semi-slavery. Kidnapping of other Pacific islanders. In contrast, other islands in the Pacific were subjected to a brutal practice known as blackbirding, where Pacific islanders were kidnapped or coerced into working on plantations in distant countries. Hawaii's centralized government and military, however, largely protected its population from this specific fate, how people were demonized into niggers without any relation to Negus. The process of demonizing enslaved and free black people into being called niggers occurred independently of any knowledge of the title Negus. Racial and social dehumanization. European colonizers and slave traders established a rigid racial hierarchy in which black people were deemed inferior. This was necessary to justify the brutal institution of slavery and exploitation. Creating a new social class, nigger was not simply a word for black people, but a term used to create and maintain a new social and racial status. The word stripped people of their humanity, reducing them to property and animals. Forgetting of history. This process of dehumanization involved intentionally erasing the history, identity, and culture of enslaved peoples. Enslaved people were stripped of their names, languages, and history, effectively preventing them from knowing about their true heritage. Ceremonial and social functions. Our public ritual spaces, flat-topped mounds, were often used as platforms for religious temples and stages for various public rituals and ceremonies. A communal gathering places, the plazas surrounded by mounds were used for large gatherings, community events, and games. At the Mississippian site of Cahokia, the Grand Plaza was used for games and ceremonies, with the chief addressing the community from the top of Monk's Mound. Spiritual and symbolic purposes, the very act of building the mounds was a spiritual and communal effort. In the upper Midwest, effigy mounds were often created in the shapes of animals, like bears, birds, and water spirits, carrying deep symbolic and sacred meaning. Astronomical functions. Calendrical tools. Some mounds and earthworks were precisely aligned with celestial events, such as the solstices and equinoxes. Observatories. Structures like the Woodhenge at Cahokia, a large circle of wooden posts, were used as an astronomical calendar to track the position of the sun and mark important seasonal observations. Political and economic functions. Centers for trade. Strategically located mound sites served as important centers for trade and commerce. Major sites like Cahokia were situated along rivers and waterways, acting as hubs for the exchange of goods and resources from across the continent. Symbols of power. The largest and most prominent mounds served as powerful symbols of a society's power, sophistication, and ability to organize mass labor. The construction required coordinated effort and demonstrated a high degree of political authority. Territorial markers. For earlier mound-building groups, particularly those from the Archaic and Woodland periods, mounds may have served to delineate territorial boundaries or mark claims to important hunting and foraging grounds. Ancient Semitics had a complex system of royal titles for its divine rulers called pharaohs, Nisud Biti, meaning he of the sedge and the bee. This title denoted the ruler of a united Upper Sedge and Lower Bee Egypt. As-Ra, meaning son of Ra. This title emphasized the pharaoh's divine lineage as a descendant of the sun god Ra. Pere-A, originally meaning great house referring to the royal palace. This term was used as a respectful way to refer to the king and eventually became the familiar word pharaoh. The Spanish Inquisition and its methods. The Spanish Inquisition was established in 1478 to address the problem of backsliding conversos. Inquisitors actively sought to uncover evidence of hidden Jewish practices, or Judaizing, often relying on flimsy evidence and betrayals from neighbors. Evidence of Judaizing. Authorities looked for any behavior that could indicate secret adherence to Judaism. Suspect behavior included wearing clean, special clothes on Saturdays, eating unleavened bread, avoiding pork or other non-kosher foods, observing Jewish ceremonies within the family, lighting oil lamps on Friday evenings. Use of torture. The Inquisition used torture to extract confessions from suspects. Torture was a systematic practice during this period, and while the Church officially prohibited drawing blood, this rule was often ignored. Lack of rights for the accused were often not allowed to face their accusers, received no legal counsel, and were frequently victims of false accusations. Public punishment and the auto da fe. If found guilty, the punishment for secret Judaizers was severe and public. The sentences were carried out during an auto da fe act of faith, an elaborate and dramatic public ceremony meant to spread terror and serve as a warning. Execution. Unrepentant heretics were handed over to secular authorities for execution, often by being burned at the stake. Those who confessed were sometimes strangled first as a form of mercy. A public penance. Those who confessed but were reconciled with the Church faced public humiliation and financial ruin. They were forced to wear a sambenito, a distinctive penitential garment often adorned with a red cross, and their property was confiscated. A posthumous condemnation. The bones of deceased heretics could be exhumed and burned publicly. A person who had fled could be condemned in absentia and burned in effigy. A lasting shame. The sambenitos of the punished were hung permanently in churches, ensuring the shame extended to their descendants and served as a permanent warning to others. Evasion and survival. While many were caught and punished, many conversos successfully kept their Jewish heritage hidden for generations. Migration. Many fled Spain to other parts of Europe, including Italy and the Netherlands and the Spanish colonies in the Americas. The Inquisition followed them to the colonies, establishing tribunals in places like Mexico and Peru. Crypto-Jews. Some created resilient crypto-Jewish societies that practiced their faith in secret while outwardly conforming to Catholicism. This clandestine existence meant adapting customs to avoid detection. Legacy. In regions like the American Southwest, descendants of these crypto-Jews have recently rediscovered and reconnected. The words Moor and Morisco are spelled differently because they refer to two distinct groups, and Morisco evolved from the Spanish word for Moor to denote a more specific identity. While both terms relate to Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula, the difference in spelling reflects a shift in meaning from the general population to a marginalized subclass of converts. Spain expelled its Jewish population in 1492 through the Alhambra Decree, driven by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella's campaign for religious uniformity under a newly unified Catholic state. The primary motive was to eliminate the perceived influence of practicing Jews on those who had already converted to Christianity. Key factors that led to the expulsion include elimination of Judaizing. By the time the decree was issued, a large segment of Spain's Jewish population had already been forced to convert to Catholicism in the wake of violent pogroms and persecutions in 1391. However, the Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478, was concerned that many of these converts, known as conversos or new Christians, were secretly continuing to practice Judaism. The authorities believed that the open presence of practicing Jews was making it easier for conversos to Judaize or revert to their former faith. The solution, as conceived by Chief Inquisitor Tomás de Torquemada, was to remove all practicing Jews from the country. Political and religious unification. The expulsion occurred in the same year that Ferdinand and Isabella completed the Reconquista by conquering Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula. With Spain now politically unified under Christian rule, the monarchs aimed for a state that was also religiously uniform. The expulsion of the Jews was seen as a final, decisive step to assert Catholic orthodoxy throughout the kingdom. Economic and social resentment. For centuries, Jews in Spain had prospered in many fields, including banking, commerce, and skilled professions. This success led to resentment among some old Christians. By law, Jews could hold positions such as tax collectors, which made them unpopular with the general population, and some were viewed with suspicion for their economic influence. Though some historians disagree on its importance, economic resentment undoubtedly played a role in the broader anti-Jewish sentiment, persecution, and forced conversion. The Alhambra Decree was the culmination of decades of increasing persecution. The massacres of 1391, violent pogroms spread across Spain, leading to the murder of thousands of Jews and forcing many more to convert to Catholicism under threat of death. The Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition's mandate was to expose and punish heretics, and its primary target became the conversos suspected of secretly adhering to Judaism. Expulsion from Andalusia. In 1483, Jews were first expelled from Andalusia after inquisitors claimed Jewish influence was preventing conversos from becoming genuine Catholics. The ultimatum. The Alhambra Decree, signed on March 31, 1492, gave Spain's Jewish community an ultimatum: convert to Catholicism or leave the country by July 31. While conversion would allow them to stay, many were still distrusted and discriminated against, as reflected in laws prohibiting those of Jewish ancestry from holding office. Ultimately, between 40,000 and 100,000 Jews chose to leave Spain, while many others converted. This mass exodus, which ended centuries of rich Jewish life and culture in Spain, led to the establishment of new Sephardic communities across North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, and other parts of Europe. The meaning of Moor. The word Moor derives from